All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Local Government Insights Podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership, your source and insight for local government technology. My name is Brennan Middleton, and today we have with us a special guest, Ronald Olson, who recently retired after being a city manager for over 35 years, and who has just published a new book called How to Manage a City. We're here today to discuss some of the key takeaways he was able to capture from being a city manager in over 7 different cities, and more specifically, advice he has for how to become an effective city manager in today's political environment. Welcome to the show, Ron. It's great to have you.
Appreciate it. Good to see you again.
So real briefly, before we jump right in, for those listening, Mr. Olson started as a government intern in the city of West Jordan, Utah, and worked his way up through the ranks and eventually became the city manager there. After spending nearly 14 years in West Jordan, he served as a city manager in 6 other local governments of various sizes and complexities, including cities such as Corpus Christi, Texas. He's now retired and has decided to reveal the inside story of how cities work in his new book, How to Manage a City. So with that, I'm going to jump right in, Ron.
Sure.
I think for those that haven't seen your book or maybe be curious about why they should read the book, could you give us a little context and just talk about just the why? Why did you write the book, and tell us a little bit about it before we jump into specifics?
Well, being a city manager is an intense profession, and I spent 40 years in local government, as you said, over 35 as a city manager. And by the time I'd finished that, my mind was like completely full all the time about managing a city. I dreamed about it at night. I thought about it during the day, and I thought, I just need to decompress my brain and kind of download a lot of this information. And the format that took was a book on how to manage a city. And another thought I had there was, perhaps along the way, other people who are considering getting into the profession or just have curiosity about how cities function, might be able to learn something from all of that. So those were the things in the back of my mind when I started writing the book.
Excellent. And sort of the basis and the structure by which you organized it, I want to talk about next. So you mentioned in the book about 60% of local governments have some type of council/manager form of government. I think that's important. And you speak to that in terms of about 4 primary duties of a city manager. You structure your book in that way. Could you talk to us a little bit about each 4? And then I'd love to go in a little bit more deeper on some of them more so than others. But could you talk to those 4 a little bit?
Well, from my perspective, a lot of times people had asked me when we met at a social gathering of some kind, what do you do? And when I told them I was a city manager, then the next question was, well, what is it a city manager does? So I had to think a lot about that. The title of the position reveals part of it. That is, you manage city operations, but that's not all of it. And there are several other things that I think are very important. For example, providing leadership, advising the city council, engaging the public. It is possible to be a good manager of things, but if you don't master those other duties, those other 3 duties, I don't think you can really excel as a city manager. So leadership is very important. I spend some time in the book talking about the qualities and characteristics of leadership that I think are important for city managers. Advising the city council, which is always a tricky job to do, but it's very critical. And engaging the public in today's world, that's just vital. So those are the 4 areas that I built the book around.
Excellent. And I love the first one, leadership. I want to touch on that just for a moment. I love the conversation and the concept of leadership because for me, leadership means a little bit different perspective to different people. And I'd love to get yours while I have you on. You talk about so much in the book, and I love that, but I'd love to get your specific perspective on what, to your point, what are the characteristics of a good, effective city leader?
Well, I in the book, I identify 11 of those characteristics and talk a little bit about each one of them and why they're important. Let me just point out a couple here in my conversation with you that I think are quite important. And the first one would be to be trustworthy. The city council has to be able to rely on a city manager's character and ethics to be able to trust what the city manager is telling them. And when that fails, it's time for a city manager to start looking for a new job because it just doesn't work. I mean, it's key to everything.
Yeah.
Another area that over the course of time I found was very important was courage. In today's political environment in cities, as well as, the general political environment around the country, you've got to have the courage of your convictions. You've got to be able to stand up for what you believe in. And you've got to be bold in pursuing the agenda. And when I say bold, what I mean is when you're in a city and you see that something needs to be done, particularly it needs to be improved or changed, you need to do that. And you've got to be bold in that process. You can't be wimpy about it. You've got to go after it and make the changes that you see that are necessary. So those are three I'd point out in my conversation with you. As I said, there are 11 other, I think, really important characteristics that are in the book.
Of course, and they can get the other 8 by grabbing the book and taking a read for themselves. So
that's one way to do
it. Of course. Sure. So you also mentioned another important aspect I want to touch on and get your perspective, Ron, is you mentioned that advising the elected body is sort of the city manager's second duty, and you listed it number 2, and I think you did that on purpose. A good city manager, as everyone, the entire audience of this show, obviously knows that a good city manager must be in sync with the desires of the council. They've got to be in sync with them. They've got to be responsive. They have to listen. Otherwise, it's not going to work out, and policies aren't going to change or get implemented. And then has to map out a course of action to enable the city council to carry out its goals. From your point of view, how should a city manager approach the role of advising the elected body while sort of avoiding the temptation of crossing over into the advocacy lane?
Well, advising a city council is a difficult and an area of being a city manager that requires a lot of skill and practice. We live in a political environment, and that is also true for cities. City managers work for typically an odd number of city council members, 5, 7, 9, 11.
Sure.
And I guarantee that every one of those individuals see the world differently. And they have different goals and agendas, and being able to help the city council with a process that allows all 11 or however many there are, all of the city council members to speak their mind, be heard, feel like they've been heard, and then allow them to find an acceptable middle ground to all of that so that they can move forward. It's a tricky business. And that's what I mean when I talk about advising the city council, is the city manager really becomes kind of the protector and the facilitator of the democratic process without getting engaged in what the outcome is. Managing the process, coaching the process, and letting the council make the value decisions that create the policies that govern the city. That's what I'm talking about when I say advise the city council, is to control that democratic process and ensure that everyone has a voice and that the decisions are being made in a good, rational way that is pointed at solving the problems, not in winning the day.
That's so great. Governing the democratic process, and I'm willing to bet listening is one of your skills of an effective leader at the same time.
It is indeed. And communication generally is, yes.
That's fantastic. All right. So one last point here, Ron, before we move on to kind of the second part of your book where you talk about systems and setting up different infrastructure to effectively run a city. One last point I want to touch on some of the duties is I found it interesting that the name of the position is a city manager, yet of the 4 duties that you mentioned, you ranked managing city operations as the 3rd duty. Why didn't you mention that one first?
Well, from my perspective, managing is somewhat of a mechanical process. Whether you're managing a city or you're managing a small business or a big business or you name it, whatever you're managing, it's a fairly straightforward, almost mechanical process. You evaluate, you make a plan, and then you execute the plan. And when that's all done, you go back and you reevaluate it, see how you did, revise your plan, and then execute again. So it's kind of a circular process of evaluation, planning, and execution. That's very important. I mean, at the end of the day, city managers are hired to get the job done, to make sure the services are being provided and that the policies of the city council are being carried out. So if you don't do that, you fail as a city manager. But in addition to managing the operations of the city, you've got these other aspects that we've touched on: leadership, advising the city council, and engaging with the public. And I submit that I don't care how well you do the mechanical process of managing, if you don't do those other things, you fail as a city manager as well. So I put managing 3rd because I want to emphasize the importance of those other things.
Love that. Love that. All right, let's shift just a moment and talk about what I think is going to be super helpful to a lot of young professionals that want to become a city leader or a county manager. They want to become that leader that you described. So you talk about in the second half what you refer to as 9 systems of local government. Mm-hmm. Could you just briefly describe those systems and why they were worth mentioning in your book?
Yes. When you look at what cities do, in my mind, I can divide all of the things that cities do into 5 basic categories: public works, public safety, recreation, community and economic development, and then support services that support those other 4 things. Every one of those 4 things have 9 systems that affect how they perform their work. If any one of those 9 systems are not functioning well, then the actual delivery of the service in those 5 categories is very difficult. So I talk about those 9 systems because I think when a city manager takes a new job and starts the initial evaluation process of looking at a city and saying, okay, I'm going to be the manager of this city, and what am I going to do? What's my agenda? What are my priorities? I think that a manager ought to go in and look at these 9 systems, look at the problems inside of each of the 9 systems, prioritize them, and then attack the job in a way that builds up these 9 systems so that the 5 functional categories can do their job and deliver the services to the people. So those 9 systems, I'll just quickly go through them. When you hear them, they'll make all the sense in the world because they apply virtually to every organization, including cities. One is the governance system, how the policy process works that gives the overall guidance to the organization. The management system, it comes back to those 3 mechanical things, and how have you built that into your organization so that it works well for every department, every division, every function. The money system, the people system, the technology system, customer service and how that system works, communication, how you interact with people inside and outside of the organization. Citizen engagement system. How does that function in your organization so you engage with your customer base, so to speak? And then I put continuous improvement in there, because in my mind, an organization never becomes perfect. It's always, whatever level of achievement it's at, it can always do a little better. So you have to be thinking about continuous improvement all the time, going back and looking at these 9 systems and applying the management process to all of them. So it's just one continual round that really never stops. It's why it took me 40 years to retire. It's like, I haven't gotten this perfect yet. So let's just keep working on it till I find the perfect organization. Well, I retired after 40 years and I still haven't found the perfect organization, because continuous improvement is kind of a eternal principle that never stops.
That's right. And we certainly couldn't justify 40 years of experience in a 20-minute interview. And I almost feel like we need a round 2 to talk through these 9. I mean, we could sit here and dive into each one of those and how you approached each one individually and the challenges that go along with each, and how you refined each one to optimize how you effectively ran the entire city at each spot. Probably different size and scale regional aspects have to impact how you approached some of those.
I have stories for every one of those. Some of them are funny and some of them make you cry.
Sure. So quick teaser, we might have a round 2 or a sequenced podcast episode here. But all right, Ron, let's kind of move into the latter part of the interview here. And we talked about a little bit, like, as you wrap up the book, it sort of concludes with a warning, for lack of a better way to put it, a warning that city management profession is not for the faint-hearted. I think people have heard that before, but for those who wish to contribute to the community full of satisfaction and reward, what is that warning about?
Well, being a city manager is an intense, demanding profession. It requires a lot of energy and a lot of emotional energy, and it's got a lot of uncertainty. If you're running, well, especially large organizations, but even small ones, if you're managing properly and delegating properly, most of the routine issues and problems that come up can be handled somewhere inside of the organization. So the city manager tends to get the problems that no one else can handle. They are difficult. There is no cookie cutter answer to them. If there was, somebody else would handle it. And so the uncertainty and the demanding nature of the engagement with elected officials, the public, the community, for somebody that just wants to go to work and put in their 8 hours and go home and have a regular life, this is probably not the profession for you, because the requirements are too intense. And so that's really the warning. If you're considering a city management profession, don't make the mistake of thinking it's going to be easy, because I assure you it is going to be challenging.
I love that.
Which is why I love the job too, by the way.
Of course. I love that. So thank you, Ron, for elaborating a little bit on that. I think it's short and important. And I'm glad that you rounded out the book at the end with that concept. So wrap us up, Ron, if you don't mind. Like, what would you describe in any way, what other advice would you have for people looking to serve in leadership roles in local government?
Well, I would say 2 things, Brennan. First of all, I want to emphasize the importance of ethics in the public sector, and I would argue even in the private sector. Every time I have seen a major failure of an organization where it gets in the newspapers and everybody, hates it because something just went terribly wrong, it was a failure of ethics to begin with. So I think ethics are just vital. Everybody who's aspiring to manage any part of the public sector needs to be very clear about what their ethics are and what it means and what it means to them. They need to give that a great deal of thought. The other thing I would leave you with, the second thing, is that public service is noble work. It is more than just going to work in the morning and coming home in the evening. It contributes to the welfare and to the benefit of actual people and their lives every single day. And to me, that's noble. That's not just a job. That's a calling, because it contributes to society and to individual people. So those are the two additional things I would say at this point that people ought to be thinking about.
So great. I appreciate it, Ron. Thank you so much for doing this, first of all. And I appreciate you sharing not only what you put in the book, but just additional insight and the makeup behind what you put in the book that's not necessarily on the pages. So I appreciate your honesty, transparency. Thank you for your public service and all that you've done over the last 40 years. And just want to remind our audience, the book is fairly recent, just came out. You can find the book in many bookstores, obviously on Amazon. And it's called, just to reiterate, How to Manage a City by Ronald Olson. So, Ron, thanks again. For all of our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Local Government Insights podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership. Stay tuned for more local government news and insights to come. We look forward to having you join us next time.